All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to welcome everyone to today's session. My name is Adam Kurtz, and I will be guiding you through today's insight session, and we'll be talking about calculations. So basically, how do we create Stratum calculations? We're going to go through a quick review of how to build a calculation. We're going to go through several examples of some calculations that are pretty common with business related calculations and what we typically see. Plus some other things that you can do, like calculating against an attribute at a level. And there's also some new calculation functions that I want to cover on some of the later releases that you could use to make things a lot easier for you in terms of different things that you can do for calculations. Okay. Well, with that being said, basically, when you enter into a calculator, you add a calculation to your view, you'll see this menu pop up. And this is how you'll define your calculation. You'll see that there's different areas within that menu that you'll gain access to. Whereas you can see on the left side where it's highlighted hierarchies, measure items, and then the functions that are available for you. So the hierarchy folder will contain all the hierarchies within the view, and that's where you're going to get your attribute stuff from. So if you, for instance, have a list price attribute, for product and you want to do a calculation on that, you can calculate extended list price. You'll find that attribute under your product hierarchy. Your measure item folder is going to contain all your measure items, such as actual sales or sales units, forecast, whatever you have within that view in terms of measures will appear under that folder. And then the last two folders will provide functions that you could use for defining your calculation. As a matter of fact, on the right-hand side, on the calculation itself, we're actually using a function called percent of change. And we're doing that based on this year and last year's sales. So that's basically going to give us a percent of change calculation. And then on the top is your formatting and the actual name of the calculation column header. And so the pull down menu for the format, you select which format you want. In this case, we're selecting percent sign, and then we'll caption the header there as needed. In this case, sales percent of change. So it's pretty straightforward once you understand, the different areas of the menu. And then also notice that you can go into some help areas under where it says expression and examples. And if you click in on examples, it'll bring up all the examples in the help document so that you can go and read through some syntax examples. So what are some of the most common things that we're seeing? Well, clearly variance and percent of change. We see that a lot where users want to see, particularly sales reps or marketing folks. Well, they want to see how they're doing this year versus last. Is there a wide gap in terms of sales? A variance could tell you that really quickly, and even better, a percent of change or a variance percent essentially is what that is. In this case, as you can see, defining the variance, well, that's just straight, math. This measure minus that measure, right? So we're taking this year's sales minus last year's sales. And I believe that's just a rolling July through September, looks like some sort of rolling time range. But we want to compare that time range with a like time range from the prior year, and that's exactly what we're doing here. So we're seeing the variance between those two measures. And then down on the bottom, we're using a function that we provide under Stratum viewer functions. So this is what Silvon provides in terms of making calculations easier, are these different functions. Because otherwise you'd have to actually do the math to figure out the variance and then take the variance over last year's sales, whereas this particular measure does that for you. And on top of that, it accommodates, if you divide by zero, it'll not show a nasty divide by zero error. So that's another reason to use these functions, is that it avoids noise essentially. So, all right, and what else can we do when we're in the expression builder? Well, we can also use, as I said earlier, an attribute. So in this case, we're using an attribute, current list price, and we're going to extend that. Well, first of all, in this particular example, we're just showing it. In this case, we're showing it, and then the val function there is actually turning that into a numeric value. So that's essentially what that val function does. And that's all that's doing. Now you could multiply that against your sales units, year to date, month to date, whatever time range you want, and that will give you your extended list price. And I will show you that in the demo. But here you can see that you can dip into the attributes of your levels by going into the hierarchy folder. And then you can use those in your calculations. So list price would be a really good example. Um, Other things like there might be some weight or unit of measure conversion rates, stuff like that you can calculate against and get what you need out of those. Um, Basically, some best practices. I'll show you an example of this, but normally if you do calculate against a list price or an attribute, I should say, there are some things that we need to do to clean it up a bit. And so normally we just only want to calculate against the measure that has data in it. So we'll look at an example of that in the demo, and I'll show you the differences between not using the if statement and just using just the regular calculation. Okay, so here, and then this is just what it would look like, right? So we have the value, the list price extended. That's not extended, by the way. That's just showing you the list price in numeric fashion. And you ask yourself, well, what's the point? Well, you can do math against this because it's now compared, it's now, formatted as a numeric value. Now, with the latest version, you don't have to do that any longer, and I'll show you why. You can actually turn the pickup field into a numeric value without having to do the actual calculation. So this is for older versions where you would have to do something like this, and then for the latest version, you'll basically, I think it's 7.5 actually, where you can actually just do the calculation against the pickup field without having to build in another additional calculation. Another thing you can do is use time uh, in calculations. I don't want to cover too much of this today because it's something that we don't see used as often anymore, only because we have since we introduced the time range, this became less and less relevant, I want to say, or less and less used. But you can mix in your time dimension and do something along the lines of like year-to-date sales, month-to-date sales, last year-to-date sales, stuff like that. And again, this really is for and here's what they look like essentially. You would then name it, month to date sales accordingly. And this would give you that calculation. Conditional other things you can do, traffic lighting, status indicators. You can pretty up your calculation, give it some pop, make things pop out to the user so that they could see these discrepancies much easier. Obviously, the bigger, margins are showing up in red, where I need to pay more attention to these bigger variances. So, and we'll kind of go into that and see how those are built. You can build custom formats, of course, and you can decide what those thresholds are going to be in terms of the colors and how they'll show up. This is a little old, but we do have this menu for runaway views in case you do a calculation and it just cranks. You get the circle of death. Well, you'll notice there's a big cancel button in the middle, and if you click on that, it'll actually just cancel the query. So pretty apparent, but nevertheless, that is available. And then for the administrators, there's actually a view monitor. So if you have a user complaining about a long running view, you can actually go in and cancel it for them in the view monitor, and it will show up here. That's me, my name, my email address, and my phone number. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about today's session or anything else about Stratum. Let's take a look at some of these calculations in action. So if we were to go into some of these, for instance, let's go in and look at ranking. So if we wanted to use a calculation that ranks our customers, as you can see, and you could do something like this, where in this case, we're ranking our sold to customers by the different division. So how do we build that? Pretty simple view. You can see that I've got sales amount and my units available for just the current month, September. And I'm drilled in on both of my divisions here and my sold to, and then drilled into the customer level and showing my sold to. And here I've got the ranking based on, um, well, let's take a look. So if we double click on that calculation, we can go into the calculation menu and we can see what the calculation menu says. And wow, that seems like the old way to do this calculation. But that's basically how you would do the ranking on this one is you can go in and first of all, we're checking to make sure that the sales amount measure is being zero, equal to zero. And then we're writing out this particular syntax to rank the customer based on the actual sales amount. Right? So we're using that rank function to do that. All right. And that's actually available in the MDX uh, function menu here. I think it's under the uh, numeric. So here we have the rank function, which is what is being used in this particular calculation. And if you click on it, it will show you the numeric expression. Now, there's a little more advanced, of course, but because of the ranking, but we're showing you what the different objects are available that you need for this calculation to occur. So, and if you write it accordingly, as you see the syntax above, then you can see that it will give you that ranking. But I don't believe, yeah, it looks like we don't have something easier for the ranking. There is a count, and we'll look at that. But this is probably the more challenging calculation, to do. If we want to do something really simple like a variance, let's look at that. So if we're going to go into a variance calculation, we can build a quick one, and we can add something into our rows. So I'm going to add in customer, and we're going to grab sold to, and then product. So as you can see, I'm going in and grabbing some product levels, product brand, and product. And then for my measures, I'm going to add in this year and last year's sales. So we'll take a look at sales amount. We'll add in sales amount for this year, year to date, and last year. And you could use absolute or um, the periodic timeframes. It's up to you. But so now we've got two columns, this year and last year's sales by customer sold to. So let's go ahead and add in that variance column that we saw. And that's a really simple calculation, right? So let's start there. So let's go in, add a calculation. If you notice, if I right click on that second column there and do an add, it will add that calculation to the right of it. So here again, here's the screen that we talked about earlier. Here's access to my hierarchies and my measure items. And again, a simple variance, well, that's easy, right? So let's select this year's sales and we'll put a dash in for minus and we'll select last year. It's that simple. Now, if we click on validate, we can see that, clearly it's valid. It's a really simple variance calculation. If we want to give it a dollar display mask and give it that var dollar column header, and then we can go in and see what that looks like. And boom, there it is. So if we right click and sort on that variance, we can see some of the wider variances between this year and last year's sales. So that gives you an idea, right? So we can see Wilder Foods, obviously, but it doesn't really put it in context. And that's what the percentage change will do. So let's add that in, another calculation. Now we could take that variance and we could take it over last year's sales, and that would give us what we want. Or we could just use some of the functions that are available and make it easier. And that way we won't have to write in additional syntax to accommodate divide by zero situations. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and do a percent of change, and then we're going to just pick this year and last year's sales. It's that simple. And then if we want to format that, that's going to be in a percent. So we definitely want to, select a percent sign, and then we can call this variance percent or percent of change or whatever it is you want to call it. And boom, there's our percent. And it's pretty flat because it's demo data. But essentially, if we move that sort now over to and do the sort on that, we can see that here's the biggest variance between this year and last year's sales. And it's another other smaller accounts. We never really, that would have been harder to detect if we didn't have the variance percent. If we were just going by variance, well, then we would think that Wilder Foods has a problem, and they don't. So as you can see, variance percent really puts things into perspective. And it looks like this needs to be just called variance. So I can go ahead and correct that right there. There, that looks a lot better. So that, obviously, created a quick view, really quick, added in those calculations. And if I drill on Penn brands, then we can see what brand has the wider variance. Bang-a-ling, we got home cooking, those have the wider variances. And we can then drill to products, see exactly, if it's the cherries product for Bang-a-ling, home cooking, it's a couple of products here that have a rather large variance. So what do we need to do? Do we need to figure out, how to stimulate demand for these items? Is there some, marketing opportunities here? These are the things that will bubble up as the business goes in and analyzes this and builds their calculations so that, again, these pop out a lot easier. Now, if we want to go in and give that a traffic light, we can actually right click and do a properties on this, and we can build a conditional format. So we can say yes to that on the conditional format, and we can go ahead and click on custom, and we can build our own conditional format. So if we want these to pop out a bit, then we can say pop out big var percents or whatever it is you want to, call it. And here we can see that, if we want something that has a big percent, we can give that a downward looking icon because, that's not what we want to see. So we'll say that's bad, so we'll do that. And then we can do the format. The background color can be, like a red type color, give it something like something along those lines. And you will get a little preview. So if that's what it's going to look like. It looks a little more pink. Let's give it a little more red to it. That looks a little bit better, right? And this will happen when the format is greater than, or that variance percent is greater than, we'll say a 0.3 here. And then we can add in another situation here for the medium situation, right? So anything greater than or less than, we'll go ahead and do it greater than a 0.1, and that'll be like a cautionary middle ground, right? So we'll just give it something like that. And the background could be something a little bit more along the lines of a yellow situation, right? And we'll go ahead and do that. And then everything else can be green or indifferent, whatever it is you want to do there. Let's go ahead and give it that green. Right, so we're doing that, and then the format on the background color, is going to be like a light shade of green, something like that. So a lot of middle ground, we kind of knew that. And then everything else kind of looks pretty middle ground, right? And then we do have, we basically achieved what we wanted, and that is to pop out the anomaly, right? And we see that we've got two anomalies that didn't really fit that threshold. So these are the ones, obviously, that the users are going to hone in on. And as you can see in condition, with that variance percent and the conditional format, then you're in a better position to really identify these situations. As a matter of fact, I can put in a filter there and I can add an action to it and have the product look for it, and email me when it finds these situations. That's an action, what we call an action, and you can build an action as an alert. And we do sessions on that. So if you want to see, those sessions, make sure you attend those so you can see how to build it and an action that will behave like an alert and will only email you when these situations occur. But here we can see we built the variance, we built the variance percent calculation, and we're able to actually get more context because of the calculations, specifically the variance percent, right? And that really allows us to see, these situations. What else can we do? Well, we talked about using the attribute. So how do we do that? For instance, if we want to do something along the lines of a discount analysis, we talked a little bit about that in the presentation, and we can see that at the product level, we do have the current list attribute already added. If you don't know how to add up an attribute to a level, you can simply just right click on that level and click on add attribute relationships. And that will allow you to add in the attributes that are available for that level, in this case, product. And we already have it. So we already have the list price. It's already been added, and that's what's showing up here. Now, the new thing here is right clicking on that pickup field, that list price field, and we can see that you can set this as a number or as text under data type. So if we use that as a number, then we can change that accordingly and use that in a calculation. And then over here to my calculation, so the calculation's already changed it to a number by using the val function. Well, that's not really even necessary now. I can actually just use that hierarchy because of the fact that the latest version allows you to just use that hierarchy and then do the math against your units and without having to change it using the val function, right? So we were able to go ahead and change that and see it works fine. So that's really what you need to do, for that is just use the pickup field. Well, first of all, change it under properties, change that field, that attribute you added, change that to a number. And you can do that globally as well. You can have your administrator change certain attributes globally, so you don't have to worry about it. And users don't have to worry about it. They can just do the math without having to change that property. But that's what's going to happen, and you'll see that you're going to want to change that over to um, a number so that these numbers will be accurate, and you can do the math against that accordingly. But again, if we go in, all that's doing is just taking that list price attribute and multiplying that against my sales units. And that gives me extended list price. And with that, I could do a variance on that against my net sales. And so this is essentially extended list minus what was actually sold in terms of dollars. And this is your discount. So who are we discounting the most, or what products are we discounting the most? And again, a variance percent might be a good situation here, but in terms of variance, we could see that the discounting is, you know, pretty heavy on the meat side. Meatloaf, the frozen lasagna dinner. We're doing some discounting on these as well. How does that relate to the customer? Or we can just flip this on its head and just do it by customer, and we can see that some of the customers have some rather large. Well, we can't because the product, there's no list price. Well, that's a good, and I'm glad I did that actually, because you can see that that list price goes away because we're only looking at sold to level. So we're not going to get that. Now let's take that back to the customer, and now we get that list price back because again, we have that list price available only at product level. What happens when we drill? We still get that list price because we still know what that list price is. So the drilling works, and now you're able to see the variance at the sold to level only if you incorporate the product as the first drill down, because that allows it to use that, continue to use that as the calculator for the extended list price. Right? So you need that there, right? So you need product, whatever level you're using for that calculation obviously needs to be part of the data grid, and it has to be present in order for you to see the calculation carry through to your drill downs. Pretty cool. So lots of other things, but those are some of the more simple things that you can do. Another simple thing that makes really easy to do are counts. So you can do product counts, you can do customer counts. In this case, we're doing a product count. We've got 64 products selling out of the food service division, and then our bigger division in terms of sales, we've got 92 unique products selling out of there. If we drill that to brand, we could see how this relates to the brand level, and we can see clearly that Farm Fresh and First Choice are our bigger brands. We can see that there's 32 products coming out of the food service division and 47 under the retail grocery division. If we drill from into the Farm Fresh brand, we can see indeed that there's our count um, by sold to now. So these are the different sold tos. If we sort this in descending fashion, we could see some of the top SKU counts by customer sold to. And of course, Wilder Food comes in. The top Eastern division comes in with 29 different SKUs, and here they are. And it says 30 on my row count because it includes the grand total. So there's 29 SKUs under Wilder Foods, and we can see that if we delve into another Wilder Foods or Pestwick Brothers under 25, we can see the 25 SKUs. There it says 26 because, again, that grand total level at the bottom. And we can see the 26 items under Pestwick Brothers. Pretty simple. And we can drill all the way back up to division, and there's our SKU count at the division level. So you can see the SKU count at any level, right? What does it look like? It's pretty simple. We can see that it's the count member function, and we're using the count member function, which is found in our Stratum viewer functions. If we were to look at just the syntax of that, we could see that you need the level that you want to count. In this case, it's product, and then the numeric expression, which is sales. Really, really, really simple. If we wanted to go ahead and do that again and just build it from scratch, it's, I think, one of the easier things to build. And you want to, in this case, we'll do it by customer. We'll count our customers. So we'll do that, and we'll base that on, under my measures, we'll base that on sales. So now instead of a SKU count, this is a customer count. We can change that column header to say cost count. And now I've changed this, completely. And we can see how many customers are buying which brands. We can see Farm Fresh coming in. Southern Sweet has the most customers down in the food service division. Interestingly enough, Farm Fresh comes in a second. Prime Grown, seems to be a top. Different, now you see all the different the mix of customers. And if we look at Farm Fresh, we can see that there's 15 customers purchasing that product, right? If we change the relationship filter, we can see that you don't have to change it because, that has no bearing. It's just going to show you those items that are sold to that particular sold. So we can see all the different customers that are buying that brand. And so on and so forth. For Prime Grown, again, we can see the customers buying that brand as well. Prime Grown. And this is different. 15 customers that are buying into that brand. Right? So these are the things that you can do with those different types of calculations. Right? And you can use those concepts to build better calculations that give you more of context, and then brighten them up, pop them out with the conditional formatting so that you can see them easier, things will pop out easier, and you'll be able to catch things a lot easier.